Let's be honest for a second. Most of you have absolutely no idea that a nearly extinct grain was saved by being literally smuggled across the Atlantic in a woman's hair. Welcome to this explainer, where we are going to correct a pretty massive historical blind spot. Look, you probably glanced at the rice on your dinner plate and think of it as just, well, a simple, uninteresting side dish, right? But what we're looking at today isn't just food. It's a biological time capsule. We are talking about a crop that can survive floods and droughts that would instantly kill that common white rice you're used to grabbing at the supermarket. Today, we are uncovering the lost crop of the enslaved. It's a botanical masterpiece that kept an ancient tradition alive in the dense rainforests of Suriname. So grab a seat and let's dive into this.
I want you to really think about this for a second. If you were forcibly taken to an entirely unknown land and you could only hide one single thing in your hair to ensure your survival, what would it actually be? I'm guessing most people might say a small tool or, I don't know, maybe a weapon. But the reality is far more ingenious. Enslaved women braided seeds of African rice, known scientifically as Oryza glaberrima, directly into their hair before being forced across the Middle Passage. See, nature's most important travel stories aren't always voluntary. These women knew they were being shipped to an unknown, brutal environment, and they wanted to guarantee they had the means to grow food and survive. This was a high-stakes act of botanical survival, brilliantly hidden right in plain sight. Now, I know most of you probably just assume that Asian rice was always the global standard. Well, it's time to break that little assumption. African rice was actually the true first commercial crop of the New World. Yeah, you heard that right. Way before the 1690s, the entire early rice industry in places like South Carolina was built exclusively on this one African species. It was the undisputed commercial king of the 1600s in the Americas. It fed the early colonies long before its much-hyped Asian cousin ever even showed up on the scene. So the absolutely crucial point to take away here is that the entire foundation of the American rice empire was African. And the history here is just staggering. African rice is an absolute biological veteran. We're talking 3,500 years ago, it was already being domesticated from its wild ancestors along the Niger River in Mali. To put that into perspective for you, while the original ancestor of the banana was still just some messy, seed-filled mutation, West Africans were already perfecting the cultivation of a highly sophisticated grain capable of feeding an entire continent. It's one of the very few independently domesticated rice species on the face of the earth. It had 3.5 millennia of biological testing and perfection under its belt before it ever became that commercial powerhouse in the 1600s New World. Okay, I frankly need to geek out over the biology for a moment because African rice is what we call an extremophile. Basically, it is virtually indestructible. It evolved to tolerate high salt levels, it can survive severe droughts, and it can endure total flooding. These are stresses that would cause modern commercial white rice to just instantly wither and die. But here is the absolute most brilliant biological trick. Its leaves grow incredibly wide. And why does that matter? Because they naturally act as a canopy to shade out competing weeds. That means this plant essentially does its own weed control. It entirely eliminates the need for the heavy chemical maintenance that plagues modern commercial farming. It's a pioneer grain perfectly engineered by nature for low-input survival.
And you certainly can't hide the visual identity of this grain either. Often referred to as black or red rice, it boasts these striking olive to black husks, and the brand color underneath ranges from a reddish-brown to a really deep, rich purple. Let's just say it looks absolutely nothing like those bleached, nutritionally void white grains currently sitting in your pantry. It is quite literally an energy bank of vibrant color and nutrients. It wears its history and its hardiness right on its sleeve, telling its own story just by its physical appearance alone.
Which brings us to the rather uncomfortable truth of how this crop actually succeeded. The success of early American rice was, plain and simple, a result of intellectual theft. It wasn't just about the physical seeds being smuggled, it was about the brains that came with them. Enslaved West Africans provided the highly sophisticated engineering knowledge required for complex irrigation and drainage systems in the incredibly tricky tidal regions of Georgia and South Carolina. European planters? Well, they simply had the stolen land. It was the enslaved Africans who possessed the advanced technical expertise that made these massive rice empires physically possible. They were the master engineers of the early American agricultural economy.
So you're probably wondering, if African rice was so incredible, why on earth did it disappear from our fields? Well, the answer lies in a maddening biological glitch. See, African rice is notoriously difficult to mill mechanically because its grains break very easily. To get the perfect grain, it has to be meticulously milled by hand using a wooden mortar and pestle. But when the 18th century rolled around and brought with it industrial hulling machines, the agricultural industry made a choice. They abandoned the wildly hardy, incredibly nutritious African rice in favor of the machine-friendly, industrially hulled Asian variety. We completely traded robust biological resilience for, you guessed it, mechanical efficiency.
But the rice didn't vanish completely. It survived in the shadows, surrounded by some seriously eerie folklore. According to an oral history from the Sarmakan Maroons in Suriname, who are descendants of escaped slaves, a hunter once stumbled upon a mysterious, deadly swamp completely surrounded by a field of wild black rice. And this swamp was so treacherous, it swallowed the hunter's dog whole. Because of this, they believed a forest spirit had intentionally cultivated that field, providing a natural gift from the deep woods. They ended up taking those seeds and used them to establish their own independent forest gardens, completely free from the plantations.
And I think this brilliantly illustrates a dramatic shift in how this grain is viewed today. We've gone from an empire-building commercial crop that literally built the wealth of the early American South to what it is today, an ancestor offering. In places like Suriname in the Netherlands, you are not going to find this rice as a supermarket staple. Instead, it's sold in tiny, specialized bags. It's used in rituals specifically to honor the deep connection between the current generation and those brave ancestors who smuggled those very first seeds in their hair. It's completely transformed from a global commodity back into a powerful, ritual survival tool that keeps a culture's DNA alive.
But, science has a funny way of realizing its past mistakes. Researchers are now waking up to the fact that we desperately need this lost grain's genetics. Scientists have actually successfully crossed the resilient African rice with the high-yielding Asian rice to create something called Nerica, or new rice for Africa. By combining the extreme hardiness of the African species with the fast yield of the Asian one, they are forging a crucial tool for future global climate adaptation. Turns out, abandoning this indestructible extremophile just because it was hard to mill was a terrible idea, and now we are rushing to breed its genetics right back into our global food supply.
Which leaves us right here. Really think about the massive irony we've uncovered in this explainer. We took a grain that was literally braided into human hair for survival, used its engineered brilliance to build an entire economic empire, and then threw it away just because it was a little too hard for our fancy new machines to handle. We have been standing next to a 3,500-year-old biological masterpiece that survived the Middle Passage and thrived in the deep rainforests, yet most people have never even tasted it. And in the end, a discarded grain smuggled in braids is now the exact key we are relying on to save our global food supply from the devastating effects of climate change. Now that's absolutely wild.